Hey, today I want to talk about the article discussing the flattening of the yield curve. So, as we know, the flattening of the yield curve measures the difference between short and long term interest rates. When the yield curve flattens, it usually means that the gap between the short and long term rates are getting smaller. And that's often a sign or signal of economic slowdown or just a potential recession. The article notes that it's been flattening recently, which has led to renewed debate about the possibility of a recession, like another recession. Some analysts believe that the flattening of the curve is a warning sign of, like I said, a recession, while others feel like it's just a significant change, as an indicator that it was once due to change in structure of the bond market. So, some people are seeing it as, it's just a full on recession again, and then some people see it as it's just a bump in the road, and just what happens, as you make moves in the bond market. But the Federal Reserve has been watching closely to the yield curve and may adjust, accordingly, whatever they decide on. But they have signaled that it would be patient in raising interest rates, but they need to act more quickly on it if they do, because they'll continue to flatten. Um, so overall, like the flattening curve is obviously a signal of some concern, but it's not necessarily a predictor of economic downturn like they seem. And this is kind of like a scary, it's kind of scaring them in a way, but this article is really just telling them to just relax and trust the process, within this market, and trust that it's not an economic downturn. Um, Answering the questions, they implied that the yield curve is upwarding slope. It's like an upward slope, and which is pretty much in healthy conditions. But when the economy is growing and investors expect higher inflation, those will continue to pick up in the future. But upward sloping is usually known as a normal yield curve. In a normal environment, investors demand higher compensation, for longer terms of bonds, due to the higher risk. But this results in higher yield for long-term bonds, which causes the yield curve to slope upward. So this is all good news. So for number two, a downward sloping, inverted, can occur when the short-term interest rates are, higher than the long-term. This can happen for a lot of reasons. Federal Reserve might raise short-term interest rates just to cool off the overheating economy, or when long interest rates fall due to investors expecting more than what's promised. So it might be a slower economic growth or a lower inflation. But the article also just overall suggests that inverted yield curve is often seen as a signal of potential, but it can indicate as investors are expecting weaker economic growth and lower inflation in the future. And then for number three, um, honestly, some analysts and investors aren't as concerned about the shape of the yield curve as they once were, but this is because there's been so many changes in the structure of the bond market. Um, Central banks, bond buying programs, such as the Federal Reserves, they have been distorted, within the bond market, and made it difficult to interpret yield curve signals, going forward. So, in addition, some investors believe that yield curve may not be as relevant in a low interest rate environment, where investors may be willing to accept lower yield on long term bonds, because of the fewer alternatives for generating income. So, some like in grand scheme of things, some analysts believe other indicators are more reliable predictors of economic growth rather than recession. And for the last question, one possible factor for the current environment of long-term yield, um, long-term yields, is ongoing bond buying program of the Federal Reserve, which is keeping downward pressure on long-term yields. Another factor is investors. expecting a lower economic growth and inflation for the future, as I mentioned, this could reduce demand for the longer term bonds and keep their yields lower. So, as tensions and things within the economic world, it might lead to investors seeking safety, for those long term bonds, which could push those yields lower. And changes within the market are expected to happen, but for future path of interest rates can also affect the long-term yields, as we know. So thank you. I appreciate you listening to me today.